All right. Hello and welcome back to Real Seekers, everyone. I'm your host, Dale, the Real Seeker. And today we are in for a extra special treat with a capital S. So we actually have a debate, an official Shroud Wars debate here. And obviously, as my audience will know, there's been this new finding, and it is in fact remarkable. It's a new historical document that I don't know how to pronounce his last name, Nicholas. Hughes. Lift it a little bit up, Hugh, a little bit higher. We can't see the title. There we go. So, a new document on the appearance of the Shroud of Turin from Nicole Oresme. He's a medieval bishop, fighting false relics and false rumors in the 14th century by a historian named Nicholas Chazizé. I apologize for mispronouncing his last name, but this is, how do you say it?
Sarzo.
Excellent.
Nicolas Sarzo.
Awesome. And he was a former student of famous Shroud skeptic historian Andrea Nicolati. And that's what we're going to be debating today is this new document, what it says, and most importantly, what's the significance or the impact of this new finding? Does it once and for all prove the D'Arcis Memorandum is correct and that the Shroud is just this medieval hoax or not? And we, on the Shroud Skeptics team, we're going to have Hugh Farey. So welcome to the show there, Hugh. And representing the Pro-Shroud. Oh, go ahead. So, yeah, how have you been on your end, Hugh? I see you've been very busy on your blog lately.
Oh, yes. Well, there's been bits. Well, it's not so much me being busy, but there's been far more commentary over the last couple of weeks than I've had for the whole of the rest of the time I've had my blog. And it's beginning to engender responses to other people making comments rather than my being directly addressed to me, which I suppose is all right.
Absolutely. All right, cool. And on the Pro-Shroud team, we have historian Jack Markwardt. Hey, Jack, how are you?
Good morning, Dale.
Good morning. Yeah, so I know it's been quite a long time since you were on the show. I think it's been at least a week or maybe a week and a half.
Maybe, yeah.
Yeah, but I'm just kind of curious. What have your very brief general thoughts been on all this hoopla about the document?
Well, I saw the news when it appeared on Hugh's blog. He became the official announcer of the news for Shroud World, I suppose. And I decided that discretion was the better part of valor, and I would wait to see what the article actually said, which is kind of goes against the grain of what I usually see. As Hugh said, it led to this flurry of comments, all of which were, in my view, not only off the cuff, but very uninformed. Especially when Hugh initially announced he was just passing on some news. I don't think he had read the article himself at that time. So, this is a little bit different in Shroud World because I think we're having this discussion after some time has passed and there's at least been an opportunity to read what we're talking about. That sometimes helps.
Absolutely. Well said. So yeah, I think at this point, I want to get straight into the show because I have the free version of StreamYard. So just so fans know, I think there's a 2-hour limit on this. So if we do go beyond the 2-hour mark and we get cut off, I have a backup on Zoom where me, Hugh, and Jack will come and finish off the rest of the show, and then I'll post that up as a part 2 there. But we'll see if we can fit it all in during the live stream and StreamYard doesn't cut us off, then great. But with that said, I don't want to waste too much time. So let's not beat around the bush. Let's get into today's debate. So, Hugh, I think since the document is supporting the Shroud skeptic claim, you for once are actually kind of making the affirmative claim. So I want to start with you actually this time. Do you want to explain what is this new find? And how does it relate to what we know about the Shroud's medieval history?
Okay, right. Well, it's all about a series of 4 philosophy books that were written by a 14th century bishop, really, but he was a philosopher. He spent far more time philosophizing than he did bishoping, as it were. His name was Nicole Oresme, and although I think 2 of his books have been translated from Latin into French, I may say. I don't think they've been translated to English, but they've been translated and published, but 2 haven't. So 2 scholars recently decided, or were commissioned, to produce a definitive a volume of these 4 books, the last of which was called Problemata. They were all written in Latin, and there are 1 or 2 copies of them, or several, about 3 copies of them, I think, in various libraries, including the Bibliothèque Nationale in Paris. Anyway, while these 2 researchers were translating the Nicole Oresme's Latin text, they came across a phrase which they thought would be interesting. They knew about the Shroud of Turin. They guessed that the phrase must refer to the Shroud of Turin, and they passed it on to 1 or 2 other scholars to see what they thought about it. In particular, they passed it on to Nicolas Sarzeau, and he showed it to Andrea Nicolotti, both of whom are experts on 14th century ecclesiastical history, who were then able to encourage Sarzeau to publish it in a paper. And the particular text that he was writing about, Nicole Oresme was writing about, he was discussing the nature of truth. And I think this is going to be quite important, because he wasn't a scientist by any means. The nature of truth in those days were described by one of the scholars producing this definitive work, as like a pyramid. And everybody recognized that at the top of the pyramid was biblical truth. And that was absolute truth and not to be questioned. You didn't have to question it. It was true by definition. Now, I say that because, slightly cautiously, because in the 14th century, the Reformation had yet to rear its ugly head. And biblical truth was what the church said biblical truth was. There was no independence of interpretation as there is now, when anybody can just grab a text from the Bible and go, look, this is what it says, and insist that their interpretation is correct. There was a correct interpretation of the Bible as promulgated by the Catholic Church, and that was unquestionable, and nobody questioned it, least of all Nicole Oresme. Then the next level down was, I think, is it authorized truth? I probably may have the name wrong, but this was truth that was written by the church fathers. Now, they're not quite as authoritative as the Bible, but what they wrote in their books were very definitely defined and well known, and written in a library and authorized by the Catholic Church. And so they were also unquestioned and unquestionable. And so nobody did question them. The next level down were truths defined by scholars, particularly, I may say, clerical scholars, because most scholars were clerical in those days, but university lecturers and professors, who I say, yes, were mostly bishops and priests and so on. And their truth was generally accepted, but it could be queried if another scholar came up with a better alternative or something like that. And then below that came a layer which we might call accepted truth, and it was a deep layer, which had no biblical or church father or even scholarly defined authority, but it was just what people generally believed. So, and it covered all sorts of things. So if you say that red sky at night, shepherd's delight, means that if it's reddish in the evening, there's likely to be sunny the next day. Well, there was no biblical, I don't think there's any biblical sanction for that, but it was generally believed because it was sort of generally true. And of course, there were various herbal medicines like aloes and plants that were well known to cure certain things. And these were generally accepted truths. That was the top level of accepted truth. And then as you go down and down and down to the bottom level of truth, you get just somebody telling you, do you think that Gladys down the road is pregnant? She looks pregnant to me. That's also a kind of truth. Now, you might think it's not a very good truth. And the level of acceptability of all these truths very much varied on the kind of evidence that you had for them. And so the discussion of some of these truths, of the accepted truths, was what Nicole Oresme was talking about. And he was saying that, of course, most truths are put forward with goodwill, and some of them are in fact true. If someone tells you that my wife's just had a baby, they probably, perhaps they are. Yes, that sounds perfectly reasonable. There's no reason why they shouldn't be. Some people may tell you a deceitful truth because they're deceitful people. And they're well known to be deceitful people. There might be a burglar who says, can you hold my horse? And while you're holding his horse, he whips out his sword and cuts your purse strings and run off with the purse or something like that. So these truths vary on what you think of the people who tell them. And when you hear a truth, it may depend on the faith you have in the person who tells you. And if it's a market trader, you probably have less faith in what he says is true than if it is a priest or someone, or a prior or someone in charge of a chapel or something like that. Mind you, he says, not everybody who is, and he writes it as good people, not everybody who's an allegedly good person can be relied upon, because sometimes theoretically good people, such as clergy, can tell you untruths. And then he throws in as this kind of example, as we know from those clergy at the little chapel in Champagne who said they had the Holy Shroud of Jesus. And then he goes on to carry on the discussion. And that little, I won't say throwaway line, but that little reference is the whole point, and that's the interesting thing that has made people say, "Oh, what does this actually mean? How did he know that this is what the wicked priests in Champagne were doing?" And he died in 1378, I think, or 77. 82. So 82. Sorry. Yes.
Yes.
Yes. So this is 5 years before Darcy wrote his memorandum. We think that he. Sorry.
7 years.
7 years before. And from the rest of the text, people think that he wrote this in about 1870, 1875, something like that. So the information appears to be perhaps 10 or 11 years or 12, that sort of distance before the D'Arcis Memorandum. So this implies that he, and by extension, because he was expecting his book to be quite popular, so people who were reading his book were aware of something happening in Leary, and that means that this is the very first reference, the earliest reference we have to the medieval shroud, to the shroud appearing in the 14th century, and that's why it's interesting. Do you want me to stop there?
Oh, sure. Yeah, if you're done, is that your opening case, or do you have more?
I think I'll stop there. I could carry on for a bit longer if you wanted, but perhaps Jack.
Fair enough. Fair enough. So just to clarify, just before I go to Jack, just to clarify, Hugh. So from your understanding, this new document, this new bishop's reasons for thinking the shroud is a fake are based on this hierarchy of authority. The Bible doesn't mention an imaged shroud. The church fathers don't mention an imaged shroud. It doesn't mention an inquiry or the confession of an artist or anything like that. Is that correct?
Well, no, I don't think Nicholas Salzo personally knew or cared whether the shroud was original or not. He was simply reporting the fact as he saw it, that some clergy had been found dishonest. I don't think he knew anything about the shroud. He wasn't really interested in the shroud, and he wasn't really interested in the specific clergy of Leary. He was merely interested in showing that sometimes good people say bad things, and gave that as an example.
Fair enough. Fair enough. All right. Well, without further ado, on the Pro-Shroud side, I'll bring in Jack to give his opening case. What is this newest document about? What is it? What does it say, and what do you make of its impact on the shroud in its medieval history?
Well, I think the very first thing you have to do here is you don't want the tail wagging the dog. So, when I look at Hugh's blog and what he said about it and what he's saying today, I see it somewhat as the tail on the dog. Because, there's an old saying that no matter what you're told, you have to consider your source. So we do this so that you can judge the information that you're getting by for its credibility and for its reliability. And then you also have to know through the source what are the biases and what are the intentions of the provider of the information, and in this case, the filter through which we're getting this information. Then we can decide whether the information is historical information, it's factual, whether it's opinion, whether it's misinformation, and especially where the shroud is concerned and the underlying central object of all these articles, blogs, and even this program is whether the shroud is or is not authentic. That's always the hidden specter behind all this. And the bottom line is that we've got 4 layers of information that have been brought to us now. And it kind of reminds me of what Winston Churchill said in 1939. Yeah, we have to, it's a history show, Hugh. What Winston Churchill said in 1939 about Russia. And he said, Russia is a riddle that's wrapped inside a mystery, inside an enigma. And that's kind of what we're facing here. And that's what I found disappointing somewhat in the way that news has been reported in the first instance by medievalists, by the way, by people who believe that the shroud is medieval. And also, but what the reaction has been from authenticists, because they're taking what the medievalist is saying as true. I mean, this is the quote, this is what he said. You just heard Hugh's presentation. I really don't, I think it was a wonderful presentation, but it was all kind of designed, I think, to show that Oresme is a truth seeker. I mean, my goodness, we have a 14th century philosopher who was a truth seeker. So anything he's going to tell us about this text has got to be the truth. And on the other side of it, where you have clergy who might be supporting the shroud's authenticity, they're already liars. We don't know anything about them, but they're already liars in terms of the way this is being presented through Oresme. And I find it a bit ironic because, Hugh is always on the stump about how authenticists are critical of Darcy and are calling him a liar. So, why can't we look at this? Why isn't anyone looking at this objectively for what we have? It's a historical text. Take a look at it objectively. Don't bring your predispositions to it and just see what it means. It could be pro-authenticity, could be anti-authenticity, or it could be a great big nothing burger when it comes to authenticity. But the way that we're getting it now is through these separate layers. And we really do have this riddle wrapped in a mystery, wrapped in an enigma at this point. So let's start at layer one. This is the text written by Oresme. What does Hugh know about it? Have you read it, Hugh? I haven't read it. Have you actually gone onto a manuscript and read it? I don't think so. Anyway,
I've only literally just found its reference in the Bibliothèque Nationale. But yes, I have ordered it, but I haven't been able to read it.
Well, yeah, that's a long answer to say you haven't read it. I haven't read it either. And so we got two people here, along with a host, who has not read the actual transcripts. So how do we supposedly know what is in the transcript and what it says, how it's been translated? Because we haven't looked at it. The next thing is we have a layer where there are these two researchers that Hugh has referenced. I believe, I forget their last names. It's Elaine. I'm just going to call them Elaine and Beatrice. I think those are their first names. And so they've written some history, some research about, and I think their focus was on Oresme. They weren't doing any Shroud research, or they weren't looking for this snippet, what I would call the snippet from Oresme. And I haven't seen their research. I don't think Hugh has seen their research. So we don't get even the benefit. The two of us don't even have the benefit of what these people have actually written, even if it's just in draft, because I don't think their research has been published as yet. So what is the source of our information? Let's say that what they have, what Oresme and A and B have written is the riddle. That's the riddle. What does it all say? We don't know. It's a riddle today as we speak. We don't know. But it's been wrapped in this mystery that is the article written by Sarzeau. And who is Sarzeau? If you read the article, you know that he's a medievalist. He's a Shroud medievalist. Everything he puts in that article is designed to make it appear that the Shroud is not authentic. He expresses his opinion that it's not authentic. And he indicates that he's working in connection with this article in some way with Andrea Nicolati, who is obviously, one of the best known Shroud medievalists in the world. And so that's the information that's coming out that Hugh is announcing, he's analyzing, all these authenticists are knee-jerking on. And it's all based on the fact that, an assumption that what Sarzeau puts in there is true. And I don't mean that he's necessarily lying about it, but I think he could be either intentionally or unintentionally writing the article with a slant from the very beginning. And then we get it today. You know about it, Dale. I know about it only through Hugh and through his blog. I doubt that if Hugh had announced it, we would even know about it at this point, unless I can see that they're running to the press, and we might have learned about it through that in some way. But we're getting all that information, through this particular prism, and it's a medievalist prism that we're getting the information.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much, Jack. So, just a quick follow-up question for you before we get into a kind of a cross-examine between you two. I'm just kind of curious. Do you think this new document has any potential to change your opinions about the Shroud's medieval history in any way, or does it just change nothing in your view?
Well, I actually think that people are fools that when any kind of new information comes in, they say that it couldn't change anything. And truthfully, again, my qualification is I've known of this for a week, so I haven't been able to do any independent research about it. But no, and for the reasons that I will give, I don't think it really makes a hill of beans in Shroud research And when I say shroud research, I don't mean the pure academic research. Sure, this was a text that I think without doubt, although I've heard people raising doubt, I think without doubt it refers to the shroud in Loret at that time. But I don't think it really adds anything to what we knew. We knew there was a shroud in Loret at that time. And then we haven't gotten to it, and I'm sure we will, but we have to take a look at what the text says and what Oresme is actually saying about it. I don't think he says anything about it that is new. And I think that it's at least highly debatable exactly what it was that he said about it. So we'll get to that. But no, I don't think so. And I don't want to say what is all the fuss about, because I know why there's a fuss. Hugh made it a fuss with the way that he presented it. He said, yeah, right, I get it. He's writing a blog. It's interesting. It's news. He writes a blog on the fact that it's news. And then he has this predictable reaction to it by people who are not reading what the text is. They're not even giving it very much thought. They just know that it seems to be anti-authenticity, and so they're going to make typical authenticity statements. And I think for the people, it's almost an insult to the people who are involved, because certainly I think these researchers are probably true scholars, and they're writing in order to get information out, scholarly information about. And even Sarzeau is, a scholar of some kind. But I think that what we're getting is a bias in terms of his reporting on it. But we can talk about the bias, and we can talk about intelligently. We can talk about what this means, rather than go back and forth shouting across a chasm, and authenticists to medievals.
Awesome. All right. And one thing I will just add, because I do think there could be, again, we need to confirm the details, see the primary document, or in my case, the translation and stuff like that. But if I grant everything that the skeptics are saying, I do think there's a slight change for me in that I believed that we could argue that Darcy was deliberately lying about everything. And I thought he was motivated by greed and was projecting that onto the thing. If we grant everything the skeptics are saying about this document, I might rethink that, because it adds background knowledge where, okay, there are, at least among some elite bishops, kind of reasons, whatever we think of those reasons that they are giving in terms of, it's not mentioned in the Bible. I don't think that's good reasoning to dismiss the shroud or think it's a hoax, but it does change my opinion there that Darcy was just doing it out of greed. Apart from that, in terms of the authenticity debate, I don't think it makes any difference one way or the other. These bishops have no justified reasons in these documents for why they're pronouncing it a fake or not, and stuff like that. So that's just...
let me make one comment about what you said, in one premise there, and that is, you're saying that this is what these bishops are saying. One of the aspects of the Darcy memo is he didn't say it. I mean, he wrote it, and it looks like he wrote it to himself, and then he filed it in his desk. So it's not something that was put out to the public that he had to stand behind and he had to defend or argue, but there's no evidence of that. Even the medievalist historians admit that there's no evidence that his memo was sent to Pope Clement VII. And this Oresme article, which I think this is one of the things that's not coming clear, this was something that also was not published. That's why these researchers are researching this manuscript for the first time. This is not something that was published by Oresme back in this period of time. This was found in his papers when he died in 1382. And so, this is research being done on manuscripts, that have been found in libraries and other archives of that nature. So no, it's not that the picture was that back in the late 14th century, these two individuals, Darcy and Oresme, were bishops who were announcing their opposition to the shroud and having to defend it publicly and having to possibly face reprimand from the church. if they did that. These are like, they're almost like secret documents in a sense that they weren't really known. So I don't think it has that kind of effect on what historically happened. I think it only has as much value as D'Arcis's document, and that is at one time someone who wrote something about the shroud wrote what it is that they did, and the implications and the meaning of what they wrote is not altogether known. And one last thing is that I don't want to play into the hands of the medievalists again here, where you mentioned lying, because it's not, Hugh often says this, and he talks about authenticist, and he's not talking about me. I don't know who he's talking about. It's the preachers that are, out preaching, the people that are in front of churches, people that are on blogs. He's not talking about people that are doing research. I never said that or Darcy lied. I don't know whether he lied or not. I do know that there's historical evidence that indicates that he would have had a motive to lie, having to do with the contributions that were running into the Lurie Church instead of his own church. But that doesn't mean that he has lied, and it doesn't mean that any of the things he said has been proven as lies. On the other hand, nothing he has said has been proven as a fact. So we've got to keep this in mind and try to keep this discussion at a level that's, and I say this as a former practicing attorney, as a trial attorney, you got to take a look at the evidence, and first of all, make sure you're talking about evidence, and you make sure you don't exaggerate it or twist it, which is often done really on both sides of this debate.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, obviously I was just representing my own opinion, and I think I had good reasons. It was a weak case, but before this document came out, I thought I had good reason to say probably he was lying, and with this new document, that may change. That's all I'm saying. But I'm just representing my own thing. All right, cool. Well, with that said, I want to turn it over to you guys to kind of engage each other here with let's start with a cross-examine section. So Jack, I'll let you heard Hugh's opening case. So why don't you, for the next 10 minutes or so, go ahead and cross-examine Hugh on 15 or 20 minutes, whatever you guys want to do, on his opening case.
Well, I only took one note during Hugh's case because, quite frankly, I mean no disrespect, but I really don't care too much about Nicholas Oresme and what his philosophical bent was, other than how it might impact him on a bias. Again, I'm a lawyer, and my focus is on what this text is about and how it affects the shroud. We only got 2 hours, and I don't want to waste a whole lot of time, as Sarzeau did in his book, on all these other trifles, really, when it really comes down to it. Sarzeau's article is kind of in 3 parts. And in part 1, it talks about this quotation and Oresme and some of the things about Oresme that you may really want to know about his bias. Part 2 is he's off on a lark with Nicolati about what all the documents mean, what all the other documents mean. And it's just, pick up Nicolati's book, you can read that. And you don't need Sarzeau, his student, his Padawan, to tell you what it is that he is saying. In fact, if you look at the footnotes that Sarzeau has, he's got 85 footnotes, and 27 of them are to Nicolati. And when he says what his sources are, it's a book by Nicolati, a second book by Nicolati, his own thesis paper, an article that he wrote. So we got Sarzeau and Nicolati; those are the sources, and they threw in one other book for good measure. I don't know how that got on the list, but in any event, I don't think it really matters too much about who Sarzeau was and what he was saying, except how it impacts on why he wrote the snippet and what he meant by the snippet. But in any event, in listening to Hugh's opening, he said that Sardo was aware that the Leary clergy was dishonest. So if it's going to be a question, because I don't know the answer to this, how does Sardo, how did Oresme know when he wrote this that the Leary clergy was dishonest? What was his evidence? Who was his source? And how does he make that statement, which I would agree with you, that seems to be what he's implying in this snippet. But how did he know that?
Is that to me?
It is cross-examination.
Yes. Well, this is partially the whole point. He doesn't say how he knows it.
Right.
So we may speculate.
So speculate. Darcy, we're into that.
No. I'm going to say no. It's worth it. Did Darcy, who was making up the fact that that it was a fake, write to him personally? In which case, would he have written that in a book which was intended for other people to read? See, we have no idea. I quite agree with you. I don't want to speculate on a particular thing. I can throw in a question. But he got this information from somewhere. And unless it was a very particular individual letter from one lying bishop to another gullible bishop, it was, I might say, perhaps amongst the hierarchy of French clergy, common knowledge. Now, it might have been false.
How do you know that? How do you know that what happened at Leary was a matter of common knowledge among higher French clergy? How do you know that? What's your source?
Because Sarzeau mentions it.
Sarzeau? He's not a 30-year-old guy.
I keep all these Nicholases. Oresme mentions it.
What does he mention?
He says that it's perfectly, that this is as an example of it. This is clearly the case for a church in Champagne where it is said that there was the shroud of our Lord Jesus Christ.
I know that. That wasn't my question. My question is, what does Oresme say where he knows that this is a matter of common knowledge to higher French clergy? And that's what his source was. Where do you get that? That's kind of what Sarzeau speculates. But where does Oresme say that?
Oresme says that the words that I've just quoted are in the little piece of manuscript, which was actually the only piece of the manuscript I've actually seen, which was published in La Stampa, and which I transliterated in my previous in the blog in which I broke the news.
Well, anyway, the bottom line,
those words in Latin are definitely there, and they're definitely in that manuscript.
No one's even talking about that, Hugh. My question was, you made a statement that this knowledge was generally known among the upper clergy in France or in northern France. How do you know that? How do you know that? You're making that as a statement.
Well, only insofar as I derive it from the fact that Oresme said this is clearly the case for the clergy in Chambéry. Now, he wouldn't have said that. He couldn't have said that if it wasn't clear to his readers. It would have meant absolutely nothing unless other people picked it up. He was using it as a general example. He wasn't picking up a particular point. He was used quite clearly, using it as an incidental reference. Okay. And therefore, it must have been an incidental reference that his readers would have understood. Now, when I say generally known, I don't suppose that your average peasant in Marseille would have known, but amongst his own circle, the people he expected to read his book, he expected to recognize the reference.
Well, Sarzeau says that his audience was academics and clergy.
It must have been quite a small audience. We have 4 copies. Well, there are extant 4 copies of his book. 2 are in Italy and 2 are in France, I think. Right. And there must have been others. I think we have to be a bit careful about the word published when we're talking about the 14th century, in that a book had to be fairly much more important than this was for it to be copied more than, say, 10 times.
Well, Sarzeau has said that it's unpublished. Sarzo
No.
says,
It's not. It hasn't been printed and distributed amongst the scholars of the
that's
world
what
today.
I mean what Sarzo means.
Yeah. No. So what we're talking about is when anybody wrote anything in the 14th century, even if it was, as it were, a publishable manuscript and not just a letter to a chum, it relied on its dissemination, on being copied out by hand. And so when we say published, from almost anything, we probably mean mostly 10 copies at the most, which were distributed to major libraries. And then people who wanted to read them had to read them in those libraries because there weren't any other copies.
Well, whatever. I think the issue here is not so much the publication, but what was his source? Where did he get this information other than if, as you are speculating, that there was some kind of report or rumor about what had happened in Liray? What is his source for the statement that you made earlier that he found out that the clergy in Liray was lying about something?
Well, as I say, he didn't have a specific source. I think that's the important thing.
That's my only point. He didn't have a specific source.
Oh, no, I quite agree.
And here's what we know about Oresme that you didn't mention in your description of him, and that he was a naturalist. And when he wrote this whole text called Problemata, it was part of this subject matter in which he was interested. It was called Mirabilia. And it really had to do, technically, the translation of that is miracles. So he was writing about miracles, but he didn't limit his investigation to just miracles like in the Catholic Church. He was talking about various phenomena that raise questions that might be unexplained. And in all these other writings that he did before he wrote this text, which this text seems to be at the very end of his life, long after he wrote these other works, he shows that his sense is against miracles. He doesn't believe in the sense of a miracle. Everything has to have a natural explanation for it. He certainly is not a believer in the authenticity of relics, being a realist and a naturalist as he is. And so it appears to me that if somebody told him a story or he otherwise picked up a report about a relic being in a church in Champagne, and that a part of what transpired there is that there were miracles that were supposedly performed at the time that the shroud was being exhibited, he would instantly, and without even having to know anything about it, say that the clergy was lying, and that whatever the shroud is not miraculous. It's some sort of a fake relic that we have there. He could write something like that without the benefit of knowledge or investigation of any kind. And so when we're going to frame what he has said, it's not just important what he has said, because we still have to get to that. But it's very important in terms of what his mindset was when he wrote the words that he did. And three things are rather obvious from his history and from what he wrote. One, he believes that the clergy in general, or a lot of the clergy, are liars. They'll falsify what it is that they're saying and doing in order to raise money for the churches. He uses those particular words. Two, he does not believe in the authenticity of relics. And three, he does not believe in miracles. He would have to get proofs before anybody told him that there was a miracle, particularly if it's a clergyman that's telling him that. So that's kind of the context of who Oresme was and what this writing is really about. And the only thing that makes it shroud related is he mentioned that this all occurred in a church where there was this shroud. That connects the shroud to what he is saying.
No, I think you're wrong. I don't think you characterize Oresme correctly at all. That's why I went into my great big dissertation to start with, to say that there was this pyramid of truths. Now, Oresme absolutely believed in miracles. He absolutely believed in everything that was in the Bible and everything that was in anything that was authorized by the church fathers. They were unquestioned, and he didn't question them.
As a matter of faith, not a matter of logic. And he's a philosopher.
That wasn't his concern. He wasn't bothered about that. That's what he thought.
Well, I don't care if he's bothered, right? I'm talking about how he thinks.
Reason and argument comes in at the lower level below these authorized things. So if someone had suggested to him that he didn't think Jesus had walked on the water, he would have said, yes, he did. There's no question of it. And if someone said it, but it goes against reason, he'd have said that doesn't matter. It's authorized by the Bible. That means it's true.
But he wouldn't believe it because a clergyman told him that.
He believed it. Well, he would have heard it through the readings of the church fathers and his own readings.
I'm not talking about that. If all we found out was a clergyman, what he makes very clear is he does not necessarily believe clergymen. So he's getting
no. He says he doesn't necessarily believe clergymen if they speak about a specific level of truth, and this is where you're confused.
They speak about miracles. That's what the.
Whoa, that's wrong as well. No, his book about mirabile is not about miracles, and I'll tell you why it's not.
Let's defer this till we get to the quote, because it's a
part of the quote. I think it's important because you have completely misrepresented Nicholas Oresme's point of view. His book wasn't about miracles. It was about remarkable things.
I said that. I said the title was Miracles, but he was writing about extraordinary.
No, the title was Mirabile, which is not miracles. That's not the translation.
Look up the Latin. That's the Latin definition of mirabile.
No, it may be translated miracles, but it's not. Doesn't mean miracles.
Well, that's the definition if it's translated that.
It has many translations.
Oh, sure it does. It has like 8 or 9 subordinate translations.
If he meant a miracle,
miracle.
No. If he meant a miracle, he'd have said miraculum.
Look,
what's more,
this is not about Nicholas Oresme, other than the fact that you brought up Nicholas Oresme and you wanted to characterize him as being some kind of person. It ultimately has to do with this snippet that he put in there and what the meaning of the snippet is. I mean, I didn't get on here for 2 hours to talk about Nicholas Oresme. I mean,
yes, you did.
It's not about him, and you haven't even read any of this manuscript yourself.
Let me just step in. I have a question here, Hugh, that I think will help. Yeah. So I grant Hugh's point about, he isn't necessarily a modern day naturalist. Of course not. He believes in miracles, and the paper says that. I'm just wondering, to Jack's main point here, though, that what is the just epistemic rational justification for his belief and his statement that the Leary Church is deceiving people and stuff? Is it, as the modern historian Nicholas says, Schelzersay says, it's this rumor going around. There's this, it's in the air that it's a fraud, known fraud, and the clerics kind of know about this. Or could it equally be, speaking to you, Hugh, that he has this hierarchy? When I read the paper, I came across, I think his basis for saying this, that they're deceivers, is, he knows that even clerics can be liars and often are liars. And he knows it's not mentioned in the Bible, which is our top authority. Authority is key for him in this hierarchy of reasoning. It's not in the church fathers. There's no mention of shroud images. So therefore, would you say it's equally probable that he's reasoning in his head and inferring, therefore it's got to be a fraud. These guys have got to be lying because our authorities don't mention it. So it's just more probable that these guys are lying. Or, why would you say that's not equally probable to, he's hearing it from other clerics? Does that make sense?
It does make sense, but it's clear from the context that that's not what he means. He's explaining that sometimes good people say true things, but he's also saying that sometimes good people say wrong things. So he's not automatically saying that because a priest says something, if it's not authorized in the Bible, therefore it's probably wrong. He's just saying that it is not automatically true that because a priest says something, it must be right. That's his point. And if I could just, and I must go back to this business about miracles. Among the miracles.
Oh, Hugh, you froze. Hello? We had a miracle, everyone. Yeah, God just shut Hugh up. I never thought I'd see it.
Oh, sorry.
You're back.
My internet dropped out and then it dropped back in again. One of his miracles was the fact that people went bald in old age. Now, he didn't think it was a miracle. What he said was that it was something that he couldn't personally explain. Mirabili were inexplicable things. It was an extraordinary thing that some people didn't go bald and some people did. And he wondered if there was a rational explanation for it. Another one was sleepwalking. Some people walk in their sleep. He didn't think that was a miracle of any kind at all. He thought it was something that needed to be explained. And according to my good friend Sarzo, he was going to write this book with 192 of these mysterious things. Very few of them were miracles in any sense that we would consider. They were just odd things that needed to be explained. And his point was that different people explained them in different ways. And sometimes they were generally accepted, sometimes they weren't generally accepted. If you like, he was simply arguing against an argument from authority, that just because somebody who you thought was trustworthy said something, that didn't necessarily mean it was true.
Okay.
That was the whole point of this.
Fair enough. So I'm going to step in. I want to switch gears. We're at 10:55. So Hugh, I now want to give you about 15 minutes or so to cross-examine Jack. You heard his opening presentation. Is there anything you want to discuss with him or question him about?
Not really, but I will. I'll develop his idea, which is very sensible and perfectly reasonable, to see how far we go with the fact that he mentioned in something that he wrote, and I'm going to read the translation that it's an English translation. I imagine the book will appear in French. Many clergymen deceive others in order to elicit offerings for their churches. This is clearly the case for a church in Champagne. Now, it was perfectly true. Everybody knew. Even Chaucer wrote that people had fake relics in his Canterbury Tales. So that would have been nothing new to anybody at all, that clergymen deceive others in order to elicit offerings for their churches. But when he writes, this is clearly the case for a church in Champagne, which was said that there was the Shroud of the Lord, he's instancing something which people knew, his readers probably knew about. Now, what Jack's correct in is that we don't know what the original source of that. How did his readers know about it? Who had said that these people were frauds? But at that time, it probably wasn't Darcy. It was somebody else. And all that I think this discovery is that before we only had one possible source, that the dean and clerics of Leary were frauds. And now we must have two sources. Now, we don't know if those sources were accurate, true, based on rumor or whatever, but we do have two sources, whereas previously we only had one. And I think that's the main point of the whole thing. It's not, I think authenticists have picked this up and jumped about as if we were having a big argument about the authenticity of the Shroud or not. And true, it's fair enough that Sarzo's article, or paper, I should say, published in the impeccably peer-reviewed Journal of Medieval History, probably the single most important journal of medieval history that there is. But his article does go on to discuss D'Arcis Memorandum and Clement's bulls and all the rest of it. And it is his argument that the Shroud really is medieval, which I happen to agree with. But that's not Oresme's argument. Oresme's argument is simply that the story that the Shroud is medieval and that the priests were fakes is going around. And I think I'm not sure whether we're discussing here Nicolas Sarzo's article or Nicolas Oresme's book. Do you see? I'm quite prepared to follow Jack and say he didn't know whether the clergy really had faked the shroud or not. He probably never heard of it, never seen the shroud, but he did know that there was a story going about that they had. So that story existed, and it existed before Darcy. So Darcy didn't make it up. So somebody else did. That's all I can say. I can't say who made it up, if indeed they made it up.
I have a good guess.
Go on then.
Well, let's first go to the quote itself, because I'm not even sure that I recognize the first part of it from what Hugh said. This is the quote that comes directly from Sarzo's article, which supposedly comes from the researchers, which supposedly comes from Oresme. It's quote, this is Oresme talking, "I do not need to believe anyone who claims," in quote, "someone performed such miracle for me," unquote. Let's just stop there. It's Oresme saying that he doesn't need to believe anyone who says that someone performed a miracle for them. Now comes his because many clergymen thus, the word is there, thus, deceive others. They deceive others by saying that someone performed a miracle for them. And why do they do it? Quote, "in order to elicit offerings from their church." So this is a general statement that has nothing specifically yet to do with the church in Lyrae. But the next sentence is, "this is clearly the case for a church in Champagne." What is clearly a case of what is happening in Champagne? It seems to be the case is that someone, a clergyman or clergymen, are saying someone performed a miracle for me. They're doing it to deceive others in order to elicit offerings for their church. So that is what he seems to be saying about what is happening in Lyrae. And then he goes on to say, go back, "this is clearly the case for a church in Champagne." He doesn't name the church, but he's got a comma, and he says, "where it was said." So in the church of Champagne, Lyrae, it was said there was a shroud of the Lord Jesus Christ. Well, yes, it was said that there was a shroud of the Lord Jesus Christ in Lyrae. So what? What is the lie that he is talking about that the clergy is saying there? Because he does not say the clergy is saying that the shroud of the Lord Jesus Christ there is authentic. He is saying that they are saying something about miracles connected with the shroud in Lyrae. And who else spoke about there being miracles when the shroud was exhibited? It was Pierre Darcy, who specifically said that the canons were putting up people to claim that they were cured when they weren't cured. So this seems to be all that we can really extract from the Oresme information about this, is that there's a shroud in Lyrae, and it's apparently populated by clergy who like to lie about miracles. That's pretty much what he's saying. Now, Hugh says, and we don't know where Oresme got this information. That's true. But I think that here is a distinct possibility. And we have to go now to what, and Hugh has still never corrected what he has placed on both of his blogs. He started this whole news out by saying there is a text from 1370. If you read that article, nobody thinks that the text is from 1370. It goes on to say that general scholars today believe that this text was written between 1370 and 1382, which is when Oresme died, in that 12-year period. Okay? And the actual researchers, the ones that are actually doing the research that this Sarzo article is based on, believe through the dialect that was used in this work that this appeared in the final work of Oresme, and it indicates his style of writing and the dialect from the years 1380 to 1382. And so it came at the end. And so another way that this has been presented both by Hugh and by these media evilists who are trying to get all this publicity from this is that, oh, this is a text 20 years before Darcy. 20 years before Darcy. Somebody is talking about the Shroud being inauthentic. When the article itself, it says, well, to the extent that this means anything, this text, it was written maybe 7 to 9 years before Darcy. What's the big deal about that? Do you believe they would have gotten this publicity if they found another text that was 7 to 9 years? But that's what the article actually says. Now, what about his source? This is another thing that nobody is talking about. Nobody's thinking about. That's what the problem is. Nobody thinks about these things. Oresme was not a churchman until 1377. I think it was a little bit between between the lines of Hugh properly described him as a dean of a cathedral. And a lot of people would assume, well, then he must be a clergyman, but he wasn't a clergyman. At the end of his career, 5 years before he died, through his friendship with the king, because he was, and one thing we haven't talked about, he's a real politico. He's a friend of the king. He's attending all these social functions in Paris. And so through the king's influence, not because of his great religious knowledge, he gets appointed, I think, to Le Sceaux. I think he becomes the Bishop of Le Sceaux, which is in Normandy. Who else becomes appointed a bishop that year? It's old friend Pierre Darcy. That's when he becomes the Bishop of Troyes. So both of these people are kind of in the same bishop's class, if you will. In France, one is located, Oresme is located some miles northwest of Paris, and Darcy is some miles northeast of Paris. And so let's say that Oresme is in fact investigating, in this case, miracles, not the Mirabilia and all the other phenomenon that Hugh is talking about. He wrote about those things too. But in this particular case, he's talking about miracles, and he's trying to find out where some miracles have been performed or talked about, etc. And he hears about Lyrae. Maybe he heard about it before. Maybe he just heard about it. Who knows? This is all speculation. But if you were doing this investigation, if you were doing an investigation of Lyrae, where would you seek information about what happened there? You would contact the Diocese of Troyes. And if you contact the Diocese of Troyes after 1377, the person who's going to respond to you is Pierre Darcy. In fact, he was still working. He was in the diocese as of 1373. He was general secretary and some vicar of something or other. He had a title. But if he makes an inquiry and he gets a response from Troyes, from the Diocese of Troyes, he's going to get it from either Darcy or for someone under Darcy's direction. And so therefore he could have said, what is the story about what was going on out in Lyrae? And two things would come across. It was a fake relic, and they were performing fake miracles. And the clergy was doing this to raise money, because this is exactly what Darcy himself accused the clergy of about 7 years later. So it could be. I don't have any more proof than Hugh. It's a bit of speculation, but I do have historical evidence that sets forth these facts, and they're quite coincidental. It could very well be that the source for Oresme is Darcy. And
he doesn't say so, though, does he?
Excuse me?
Why doesn't he say so?
Have you read his book? I mean, does he say what his sources are for any of these things? When he's talking about people going bald and growing hair, does he say what this is not, you yourself said, this is a throw out in some other
text. But he could have said, he says it's clearly the case. Now, if he only had
What does that mean?
some information from Darcy, he would surely have written, "The Bishop of Troyes tells me," or even the Dean of Troyes.
Is that his style? Is that his style? Does he say
Yes.
does he give his sources? And it's clearly the case in his mind. This is what he clearly believes happened. I'm not doubting his sincerity. But yeah, I mean, if I was going to make a counter argument to this, I'd jump on your side and say, well, Darcy could have told him a lot more. And he didn't. So maybe he's not the guy talking to him. But then maybe again, all Oresme is concerned about in this book of Mirabilia, at this point, he wants to talk about miracles and clergy lying. And he hears about this, he finds out about it in some way. Maybe he even meets Darcy at some convention of bishops that they have at the time. I don't know. I don't know where he got
No,
it.
you don't. You accuse me of speculating. You're putting together your own collection of speculations.
Well,
It's better
it
just to say
beats yours.
you don't know where he got it
It
from.
beats yours. You said he got this from other clergy. And that this is
I said-
well known.
he
You have
said-
no facts for that.
He says it is clearly the case, and I don't think he would say that in a
You
book
just
which
said,
he
I don't
hoped
think.
other people would read if he got it from a single person.
No, I know Sarzo wouldn't read it this way. Nicolai wouldn't read it this way, and none of your medievalist friends would read it this way. But I don't think it's an authentic statement, but I don't think it's any kind of statement at all. If somebody says it's clear, I'm only saying is that there is a coincidence afoot here, and what the medievalists are trying to say is that Oresme is a source for Darcy, or is a predecessor to Darcy, and corroborates what Darcy is going to say. And I'm saying it's a possibility, maybe a distinct possibility, not a probability, but it's a distinct possibility that Oresme got that information in the first place from Darcy, and therefore this is just self-confirmation of Darcy. But I think it should have been discussed, Hugh. I think that the fact that when you wrote the blog, and you've written two, and you still haven't corrected it in that way, this is a text that your experts are saying was likely written between 1380 and 1382. And all the scholars, according to Sarzo, believe it was after 1370. And you're still pushing, in both blogs, you're still pushing the narrative that this was written in 1370. You have no source for that, and it actually is opposed by the sources that you're using. I don't understand it.
Okay, so I'm going to step in because we are at 11:10.
Well, I just want to say I'll change it. I will. I'll change it and to represent exactly what it came out at.
Right, and then people would understand, not only understand it better, but understand why it doesn't have the effect or the importance or the significance that you think it does.
Okay, all right. So that wraps up that.
I don't think it makes any difference. 10 years.
All right, guys. And Hugh,
You're the one that said it was a long time. You're the one that knew the years an issue.
Okay, so let's move on. And Hugh, again, remember to mute yourself just so I don't have to do it, because there is an echo coming through when you're not speaking, and when you want to, you can unmute. But I just want to ask a couple of quick audience questions at this time before we move to the next section. So that the first comes from beloved Teddy Pappas. Everyone knows her here, and we're all friends. So she's asking, why should it be assumed that this quote is actually talking about what we call the Shroud of Turin? And that's what's being referred to. There were many fake relics floating around at this time. And so it could even be a painted copy of the Shroud of Turin. And she mentions later on that it just mentions the shroud came from Chambéry, which Leary is just one city or village in. There could be from anywhere else. So,
You mean Champagne. You mean Champagne.
Champagne, yeah. So, but basically, Teddy's question is, how do we know this is even talking about what we call the Shroud of Turin?
Go, Hugh.
Oh, is that to me? We only know of one of these shrouds, and we only know of one scandal involving these particular shrouds in the Champagne area. We do know of the Shroud of Besançon, but it can't be that, because that's in its own diocese. There were the Shroud of Cadouin, the Shroud of Carcassonne. There were several other shrouds about. But so we know of some of them. We also know of endless reliquaries that have got pieces of the shroud. but we only know of one that's been accused of being fraudulently displayed by a pope, and that's it. That's all I can say, really.
Fair enough. Jack, do you have anything to say on that, or you're ready to move on?
Well, I didn't get what Hugh just said. I don't know of any shroud that's been accused of being fraudulently displayed by a pope. I don't know what pope that is or whoever made that description. But no, I mean, I said in the beginning, my own assessment, yes, it does not say from the Diocese of Troyes. It does not say from the parish of Liray. But I think it's a reasonable reference that it is talking about the shroud that had some within 15 years or so before when this text was written, was displayed in Liray. There's also, and it's almost a side note, but just as a point of historical shroud information, there is, I think his name was Chifflet. He was a historian, and he wrote back. At one time, he made a claim that Geoffrey de Charnay's widow, Jeanne de Vergier, actually stole the shroud from the cathedral at Besançon, and then with the connivance of her uncle, who was the a bishop at that time of Besançon, put the Besançon shroud, that cartoon of a shroud, in back and replaced it in Besançon. Now, that's the only source for that, but since we're just being intellectual here, it should at least be
Chifflet who says that. I don't think. Wasn't Chifflet the chap who said that both shrouds existed?
I don't know. Like I said, I'm pretty sure it was Chifflet, but in any event, somebody said that there was another shroud. Somebody said there was another shroud floating around at this time, but as Hugh said, it was down in Besançon, which is some distance from Champagne. So I'm not disputing for the time being that this is the Liray shroud, but Sarzeau himself criticizes Oresme's imprecision in this, and it's very strange because Sarzeau thinks that Oresme knew about this at one time and simply forgot the name, and so he let it go out this way, when he also says he thinks this was a matter of general knowledge among clergy in France. So he could have asked any clergyman, what was the name of that parish where the shroud was, and somebody could have given him Liray. So it's at least suspicious, and it's not nailed down 100%.
All right. So the last question is from Omar. I think this is for you, Jack. I think it popped up when you were speaking, but you mentioned, either you or Hugh mentioned secret documents. What were you guys referring to there?
No, I said that. Hugh didn't say that. And it's the trouble with using throw out terms and throwing them out in context and thinking that everybody's going to understand it. What I said was that both of these references to there being a shroud in Liray and there being fake miracles associated with them, they were in documents that were not published at that time. D'Arcis Memorandum is a draft, and it was found and kept in the records of the Diocese of Troyes. Oresme's statements are in a manuscript that has yet to be published. So that's what the idea, secret. There was not supposed to be any connotation of evil or plotting or conspiracy with that term.
Awesome. All right, cool. So with that said, I want to move on to the next section, which is, okay, what I want you guys to kind of discuss, what are the implications, now that we have this text, in relation to the other medieval documents that we've already known about, especially the dreaded D'Arcis Memorandum. Does this new finding have any impact, or vice versa, on that front? And so Hugh, I'll start with you to. Well, actually, first of all, I want to get both of you on the D'Arcis Memorandum. Just on the record, there are various elements to what the Darcy quote says. So, Hugh, I just want to get from you officially, so that I don't misrepresent you or no one misrepresent. Do you think that the D'Arcis Memorandum is good evidence, including this new document and stuff? Do you think it's good evidence? And what elements of that D'Arcis Memorandum quote do you think are historically true or probable to be true versus probably false? So do you think it's true they were greedy? Do you think it's true an artist confessed? All of those elements. So if you could just clarify that first of all.
Yeah, right. Well, yes, I think this is something that you misunderstood early on. I said that it was very good evidence, but it wasn't necessary. Had the D'Arcis Memorandum not existed at all, we would still have no knowledge that anybody had ever thought that the shroud was genuine until about 1430 or 40 or something like that. Maybe for 100 years, there was no suggestion, apart from the D'Arcis Memorandum, that anybody had ever thought that the shroud might be real. It was exhibited several times when Geoffrey II de Charny asked for permission to exhibit it from the passing cardinal who was passing through at the time. He said, "Can I exhibit my copy or representation?" And the cardinal said, "Yes, of course you can." Darcy apparently said, "No, you can't." But the Pope said, "Yes, of course you can. It's a copy or representation." And a bit later he said, "Well, of course you can, as long as you make clear that you say it's a copy or representation," and so on. Nobody seems to have thought that anyone had ever thought that the shroud was genuine. And in that case, if this was the case, then so the D'Arcis Memorandum would be not necessary for anybody's case. However, it's Darcy who first introduced us to the idea that the shroud might have been exhibited before 1389. That's the first time that we first see it, and that Darcy is referring to a previous history. And because he was alone in that, it was the only source we had. We didn't know, or at least we medievalists thought he was probably right, but authenticists thought he was probably wrong. But he was the only source. There was no corroborative source that the shroud had ever existed before. So at least we know from Oresme's book that somebody else also knew that there was a piece of cloth claiming to be the shroud in Lire. So we have corroborative evidence of Darcy's mentioning that the shroud existed earlier on. We don't really know, even now, neither Oresme doesn't specify when this was. We still only have Darcy's word for round about 1355, 1356. Who knows? Maybe it was 1370. That's only Darcy's say-so. But we do know that he wasn't the inventor of the story that there was a shroud hanging around Lire before the 1380s. So that's the first thing. And corroborating that makes us ask ourselves, so what else did Darcy say that turns out to have been true after all? Now, it was Darcy's claim that that Henri de Poitiers had made sure that the relic was taken away and not shown on the grounds that the clerics were frauds. Now, Darcy might have been lying about Henri de Poitiers, but his idea that the clerics were frauds was not his idea, or not alone his idea, unless, as Jack says, it was entirely his idea and he passed it on to Nicolas Oresme, which I think is, as Jack mentioned, pure speculation and most unlikely to be true. So we've got this mention that the shroud was a fraud from other sources other than Darcy. And I think we've got to track back and say, well, so if Darcy was right about this and it was right about that and it was right about the other thing, where was he lying about? I mean, there was a bishop called Henry of Poitiers. We've got certain comments from him. We have Darcy in his memorandum saying, if you want me to provide chapter and verse, I will. At the end of it, he offers to provide all his sources and all his evidence if anybody wants it. But apparently it's not necessary because it was perhaps sufficiently well known not to be necessary, or I don't know.
Fair enough.
But so that's the real point about this this new source, is that it corroborates at least some of the stuff that has been claimed to be completely false.
Okay, just before I go to Jack, so just to confirm, for the most important aspects for me are this inquiry by Henry de Poitiers, where an artist confessed to having painted the shroud. You do think, either in light of this new document, or even with or without it, that it's sufficient on a balance of probabilities to prove these elements historically happened. That's your reasoning.
Yes, I see no reason to believe that Darcy was telling a lie, partially because why should he? And secondly, he offered to provide all the documents to corroborate what he said. In fact, that's the most important reason.
Fair enough. Okay, cool. So I will make sure to represent you properly going forward there. But Jack, I want to bring you in. Same sort of questions. What is the implications on the other documents from this new finding? And with the D'Arcis Memorandum, the most important document, because that's the only document that gives us a valid evidential basis for adjudicating on the authenticity question. What elements of that document do you think are either true or false?
I dropped out again. There are two internet sources quite close to me, one of which is mine, and which has my own password, and one of which isn't. And for some reason, my computer, while it's scanning the airwaves, occasionally goes for the one which is further away and less reliable, and thinks, "Oh, I'll lock onto that."
Oh, okay. Well, yeah. I was asking.
Dropping back in.
Yeah. So no problem. So you're back, but just put yourself on mute so Jack can give his answer to that question. Then I'll let you two go back and forth on
that. I think I kind of lost your question there when Hugh came back in, but I think that you're asking what impact do I think that this document has one way or the other on the D'Arcis Memorandum and the other documents from that era. Is that it?
And the specific claims, like about the entity and stuff like that.
Yes. Well, my position on the specific claims, which I detailed on, I don't know, I think it was like 40 pages of the book that I published in 2021 about the Darcy allegations. There's something like, I think 7 or 8 specific allegations that he makes. My contention is that all of those allegations are not proven, and if I had to select, I would say they're false, and I would say that they are false either because Darcy had bad information about it. He may have been told these things by somebody, I don't know, or as we discussed before, he could be making these up of whole cloth. So if you take the 7 allegations that he has there, including the artist allegation that he makes, about the only one that I think Oresme's text has anything to do with is his allegation, Darcy's allegation, that there were miracles, false miracles performed when the shroud was present. That does seem to be exactly what Oresme is saying about this shroud that is in Champagne at the time. But I actually think that there's a negative, from the medieval standpoint, I think Oresme's text is a negative to proving Darcy's allegations, because, I don't care how the information got to him. If it got to him directly from Darcy, or it got to him by people who knew what happened out there, you would think that if any of the other allegations occurred, it would be known, it would be conveyed to Oresme, and Oresme would recite some or all these things. So he doesn't say that that the shroud was a cunningly painted object, as Darcy does. He does not say that the Leary Dean and the canons there were doing this to perpetrate a fraud. He seems to say that they might be lying, and they might be lying about the miracles, but that seems to be something that was common in the churches of that area, that you had a lot of clergy that was lying about miracles so they could attract people in the church and they could get their contributions. He certainly does not say anything about Bishop de Poitiers conducting an investigation, procuring a confession from an artist that he painted the image on the shroud, that he convened a council of wise men to get their advice on what was going on, and that he began to commence formal proceedings. He doesn't say anything about that. And he certainly does not say, as Hugh mentions in his blog, that de Poitiers denounced the shroud as a fraud. You know, I don't even know where that comes from. It comes from Darcy. It does not come from Oresme. He doesn't even mention Poitiers. He doesn't mention that anyone denounced the shroud as a fraud. That's one of the things that I found most misleading about Hugh's blog there. And he makes no mention that that this object was hidden by the clergy and supposedly has then been kept in hiding up until the time that he wrote this particular text. There's none of that ends up being in D'Arcis memorandum some 7 to 9 years later. And so the fact that he doesn't mention any of these things, all of which are kind of important to proving that the shroud is a fraud, if that's what Oresme's contention is, and he doesn't mention them. So I think it's supportive evidence that Darcy's information are either misinformations or lies. I don't think it helps the credibility of the D'Arcis Memorandum one little bit.
All right, awesome.
I think exactly the opposite.
Of course, you have an opinion. I'm reading it as an authenticist. This is where my mindset is. You're reading it as a medievalist. That's why I have from the show. Okay, but you know, this is my this is my version.
That's okay.
This is my contention. And one other thing.
That's all right. As long as our listeners understand that I think exactly the opposite, and for very similar reasons.
Are they that dumb? They don't know why you're on the show and I'm on the show. They know you think the opposite. You write a blog every week. I mean, they know that. I've written a book. Right. Everybody knows where we stand. This is why Dale is having us on the show. But you know, it's not exactly true that no one would have known that the shroud was exhibited without Darcy or Oresme, because when Clement issued his first bull, he has certain recitations in there, and in his recitations he has that the father of Geoffrey II, who was making the petition to have new exhibitions, he formerly placed this shroud into the Church of Leary for divine worship. Those are his words of what he uses there. So we would have known that there were exhibitions back in the 1350, you know, Pace, Darcy, and Oresme. But what we wouldn't have known from what he said specifically is that it was claimed that the shroud was authentic. But we would have inferred that because there was a canon law called Canon 62 that said you could not exhibit and you could not venerate an object that was a worthless fabrication at the time. You couldn't even put it out for veneration without the approval of the Pope. So all this went down earlier with the tacit approval of the Pope, and there would have never been an exhibition of just an item of curiosity. It was put out as a relic, which meant that it was put out there as if it was an authentic relic. Back in the 1350s, I'm not saying in the 1389s with what Clement put on there, but I'm saying back in the 1350s, that's what Hugh was referring to.
All right.
Yeah.
So
Now, we had this discussion before, and I'd quite like to bring it up because I spent a lot of time emailing Nicholas Sarzo myself to find out about this divine worship thing. The Latin expression is divinum cultum, and it's a very formulaic expression, and it literally refers to divine worship generally. It does not refer ever in anything I've ever found to the specific veneration of a relic or an event. It just refers.
Not, but it's the worship. It's the worship of God, right? It's the worship of Jesus Christ.
It's just divine worship. It doesn't necessarily. When Henry of Poitiers writes, to Geoffrey de Charnay, saying, "I approve of the way you're trying to increase divine worship," he's not saying the divine worship or the a particular cult. He's just saying you're trying to increase divine worship generally, and you're very assiduous and keen on doing so.
Well, I mean,
and
that's your interpretation. But the
it's not. No, it's not. The cultum does not mean cult. It never has, and it doesn't now. And I think
but it represents a form, an organized form of worship, and in this case, it's worship of the divine. And worship of the divine. It's just coincidental that at this time, it's just coincidental that at this very time there are pilgrims going from all over the world into Lire to venerate the shroud, and that's just a coincidence, right?
No, that's a guess on your part. Divine, because there weren't at that time. Henry, the shroud wasn't there, and Henry wasn't saying that it was. Henry was just saying, you've built this chapel and you're very assiduous in encouraging divine worship. And I wish there was more.
And Darcy, who you quote all the time, says that the shroud was on exhibit about 34 years before there, which is about 1355. And so Hugh Farey knows that the shroud wasn't there in 1355. It was in there after May 28th of 1356, because he doesn't want it to be there when Henry writes this letter. And you state that as if it was a fact.
I don't know. All I can say is that Henry says nothing at all about the shroud, which, had it been in Henry's eyes the genuine relic, he would have said something about it. And I think the fact that he doesn't is very definitely.
He would have said something about it. I mean,
it's an instance.
And you would have said how he said it about it. I mean, these are interpretations.
No, that's absence of evidence, very definitely being evidence of absence. If the shroud or any relic had been of relevance to his letter, he'd have said so.
And I guess if Oresme thought that it was relevant, any of the other allegations that Darcy made, he would have said them too. So he didn't say them, so they must not be true. That's the kind of reasoning that's going on here. It's irrational reason.
That's not true at all.
Well, I mean, that seems to be the argument that you're making.
I'm saying that in this one particular case, had the shroud, which was a significant, if not the most important relic of Christianity, had it existed, Henry would have said something about it. And he didn't. He didn't refer to specific worship of any kind. He referred simply to the encouragement of divine worship.
Well, we don't nearly have the time to go into why I do not believe there was a formal bull and why they were not talking about the shroud at that time. But let's just put it this way. At this time, the Avignon papacy was trying to resolve the schism with the Greeks. They were working through a Catholic emperor at that time, and the Catholic emperor would have certainly demanded the return of the shroud to Constantinople if the shroud was being treated.
I don't think that's true.
Well,
no, that's not true. I've researched. No, I'm sorry. I've researched that too. The Catholic Pope was much less interested in healing the schism than the Byzantine emperor was in healing it himself. He would have done anything to get a military assistance.
That's why it may not have worked, but the Pope was trying to work it through him.
He would have done anything to get military assistance from the Catholic West. And he begged the Pope for all sorts of assistance, which the Pope was unable to give him. The last thing he was going to do was quibble about a relic which had turned up.
Was he or was he not in consultation with the Pope at that time to end the schism?
He was begging the Pope. He was saying that he wasn't trying to end the schism at all. He was trying to get military aid.
Yes, and what was the Pope asking for in return for the military aid that they never gave? They wanted the schism to be ended. That's what they were talking about. And that's why they could not put the shroud out there. But this is a sideline. It's
no,
like
it's not. No. Whenever I say something, it's really important. You say it's a sideline. John II of Byzantium, John V, was it, of Byzantium, knew perfectly well that the crown of thorns had been bought from Baldwin II, and that lump of the true cross. In fact, all the relics in the Sainte-Chapelle had been bought. If he'd wanted to get those relics back, he'd have got them. He'd have mentioned those, the important relics.
He couldn't get them back. His predecessor, Baldwin II, who was a legitimate emperor of Constantinople, sold them to King St. Louis IX, so he couldn't get them back. The shroud, no one knew how the shroud would have gotten from Constantinople to Lire. And, you know, the general consensus probably was at that time it was stolen by some crusader like the rest of the relics and brought there. That was an article procured by theft, not an article procured by purchase. There's a distinction. I mean, really.
No, that's again that you're changing your own argument slightly, which was that the Byzantine emperor would have accused the West of simony for having bought these relics. That was
my argument that it was simony. I think it was simony. The church might have found that, but I don't think the Byzantine emperor, you made a very important point about that in your book. Yes. That's how I knew about it. Went off to research it. But I don't think you understood it. I think you read about the simony was on the part of King Louis IX and on the part of Baldwin. Their commission of simony has nothing to do with legally whether the Byzantine emperor in 1356 is entitled to get the shroud back if it was taken by theft. That's the difference. But I don't know why we're talking about that. You want to talk about?
You brought it up.
Fair enough. I do have some questions for you guys that are relevant. I'll let you finish, Hugh, because you're in the middle of a sentence. But after that, I want to ask you.
I don't think the Byzantines would have cared tuppence about relics from the West. What they wanted was military aid, and they would have done anything to get it, even to the extent of the emperor becoming a Catholic. It wasn't a Roman Catholic. It wasn't because he was the slightest bit interested in becoming a Roman Catholic. It was because he wanted military aid against the Turks.
He converted to Catholicism about 5 years after that. His mother was a Catholic from Austria. Come on, a Roman Catholic. Get with the history. This is what
he was. I knew that. I know what his mother was.
Well, then why wouldn't he want to become a Catholic? He was close with his mother his entire life. He wanted to become a Roman Catholic, but he couldn't and still be emperor.
So what I'd suggest is, Hugh, you said you've done research. Why don't you send me your sources so me and Jack can look into this, because we are going to cover this in a future show this period. But I want to kind of get back on track to this Oresme thing. Like Hugh, I've also been in touch with Nicholas Sazazet. He's a very nice, a great person. He was very helpful. But I do have a question for each of you. First, Jack. So one of the main pro-Shroud arguments about the D'Arcis Memorandum and about this new Oresme document is, look, there's nothing here. There are no details. Why aren't people quoting if there was an inquiry and an official inquiry pronouncing it a fake and it was common knowledge among all these bishops? We would expect quotations from people and official notation and details. Now, I asked Nicholas what was his response to this. Why don't we find these details mentioned in this new document? And he says this, quote unquote, "In fact, from what I know of medieval times, when we have very little detail about who the forgers, maybe I should share my screen just so people can also see it. If that helps. Okay, share my. Is that popping up my email?
I can't read it.
Hold on. Oh, you can. Let me make it full screen.
It's very, very small.
That is it still small? Okay. Well, that's the best I can do, but I'll read it. So, in fact, from what I know of medieval times, when we have very little detail about who the forgers were and how they worked, I would say exactly the opposite of your question. It would have been very surprising if Pierre Darcy and Oresme as well had given the name of the forger or details of the method, and since his memorandum is neither a report of an investigation nor a treatise on the manufacture of the images. And even in these treatises, established artists' names are very rarely given before the 15th and 16th centuries. So demanding the name of the forger seems very anachronistic to me. Here, modestly, I would make a remark also valid about expecting Oresme to tell us more about the proceedings in Leary around 1355. Given the fact that these documents were not produced in a legal context, expecting them to provide us with details about the proceedings is a methodological error from a historian's point of view. The sources were not produced for future historians, and we should not expect ancient sources to provide information that meets contemporary standards of evidence or answers the questions that concern us today. So that's what Nicholas, the author of this paper, says. So, Jack, I just wanted to get your sort of rebuttal to that there. And why is this? Okay. You guys are not showing up on the screen.
Yeah, it's gone black.
Must be still sharing or something. All right. Well, but Jack, yeah. If you, in the meantime, while I'm figuring this out, if you just want to give what's your take on that? That we shouldn't expect to have official quotations, or there could have been this official inquiry, and it's wrong for us to demand all these details in the documents.
In the documents that you're referring to, Dale, are we talking about the Oresme text, or are we talking about the D'Arcis Memorandum, or both?
Both. I asked him about both, and he said in both cases we would not expect such details.
Well, let's look at what both of these things are. I probably somewhat agree on the Oresme text, because this is a throwout. It's a snippet. He's trying to prove a point about miracles and the veracity of clergy, and he's just grabbing at what he thinks is an example of that out in Champagne, probably in Lorraine. So I would not expect that Oresme would have this kind of information or make inquiry of it. But I do think that if I'm a medievalist and I'm going to try to use his little snippet to support what Darcy said later on, then I'd have to say, well, then he doesn't say any of the things that Darcy says, so I don't think it's corroboration. On the other hand, the Darcy memo itself is a whole entirely different document. This isn't addressed to the general public. It's not a historical book. It was an argument that he was making. It's addressed to Clement VII, and it's an argument he's making for why Clement should halt the exhibitions in Lorraine that are going on in 1389. So he's making his best case for why Clement should do that, and primarily arguing that the shroud is a fraud and therefore is a danger to the faith. And Darcy was a former attorney, so he's got his arguments organized very well that way. But you're going to, in doing that, you're going to bring all the information to bear that you can. So if you focus on his claim that there was an artist, then if you have the information, then you're going to name the artist if you have that information. If you're going to claim that the artist was capable of painting the image that's on the shroud, you're going to extol the artistic abilities of this particular alleged artist. So no, I don't agree with Sarzo and what he's saying there, because I think he's forgetting what that document was intended to be. It was intended to be sent to Clement as an argument. It never was. Previously Hugh said, Darcy offered the Pope to present any proofs the Pope may want. Yeah, he did in the memo, but then he didn't send the memo. So maybe that's one of the reasons he didn't send the memo, because he couldn't make those proofs available. But in any event, no, I don't think that.
Speculation, Your Honor.
Excuse me. I don't.
Speculation. Maybe that.
What speculation? What are you talking about? What is speculation?
He didn't have any. He didn't have any evidence, and that's why he didn't send the memo.
He didn't write about any evidence.
That's a guess.
Right. Well, did the memo have any evidence? He
said he had evidence.
Did the memo say he had any evidence?
Darcy. Yes.
He wrote the thing,
the memo
and then
does.
when he looked
It says,
at it,
I've
he
got
said,
lots of
number one,
evidence.
I might be breaking the order of silence that's been imposed on me by this Pope. That was probably one of his reasons. And secondly, the Pope may call me in and ask me to present this evidence. And if this is all I give him, if I have nothing more than this, I'm going to be made a fool and maybe be excommunicated. But the question is, why wouldn't
that's a guess on your part.
He had it.
It's a wild guess.
A wild guess. Yeah. Okay.
Yes, wild guess. Well,
it's like,
you're just
like
anxious.
This was written in 1370. That's not a wild guess. Yeah.
All right, fair enough. So thank you for that answer, Jack. But I have a question for you, Hugh. And so I also asked Nicholas about this problematic aspect for his new document, the Oresme document, as well as the D'Arcis Memorandum, because it clearly puts the origin of the shroud as a painting, an artistic creation of whatever in the 1350s, in and around there. And obviously, as you know, as you've argued, Hugh, the carbon-14 dating, and Nicholas didn't know the answer to this, so that's why I raised it to you as a scientist. The carbon-14 rules that out. We know it. I think you said it's scientifically impossible or virtually impossible for it to date from the 1350s. It had to date, I think, between 1290 to 1320. So that's based on the carbon-14 date. So I just wanted to get, how do you reconcile this? The scientific data is directly contradicting these new historical documents and the D'Arcis Memorandum.
Well, I found that a real problem. And I thought, well, how can we reconcile this? Until somebody just emailed me with a single one-line comment saying they used old linen. And suddenly you go, yes, bolts of linen could hang around, or bolts of cloth could hang around for 10, 15 years or so. When the Stirp team were looking for old bits of linen, they managed to find all sorts of stuff that people had in their attic from 20 years previously. So cloth lasted for a very long time. And after all, the carbon dating doesn't date the image. It only dates the material. So there we go.
But
maybe
this
it's
a rich cloth, like your Quem Queritas hypothesis. Isn't this like an altar cloth for special Quem Queritas ritual? It's not just some random cloth.
No, that's even more reason why it was made in a huge long bolt and it was very rarely used. So they only used it, I don't know, for particular occasions, maybe altar cloths or possibly, who knows, the Quem Queritas thing. So I don't find that a problem anymore. I did find it a problem, I have to say, but I've stopped finding it a problem now.
Okay. Okay. Cool. So you find your Quem Quercus historical hypothesis is fully consistent with this new document and all the.
Yes, I think it still makes sense.
Fair enough. Fair enough. Okay. So I see we've got two audience questions that I want to ask you guys. Just make sure I get it in within the 2 hours. But so Fire Ring, he says off topic, but I'm curious if Hugh is making any progress in his bas-relief experiment. So I guess have you, beyond the peer-reviewed papers, have you done any further experiments advancing, and what have the results been?
Well, I've been quite busy since then, but I probably will do a bit more. But I explained quite clearly why I was reluctant to do a great deal more, and that is because until the characteristics that we know about the shroud are much better defined, there doesn't seem much point. For example, Ray Rogers was convinced that there was a layer of starch all over the material. And I think we don't really know. If I knew whether the linen had been starched, whether the flax was starched before it was woven, whether the linen was starched after it was woven, whether there was some sort of sizing agent or something like that. We don't know the source of the calcium all over it. We just don't know enough about it for it to be worthwhile doing a great deal more. I've had what I consider a reasonable proof of concept, but until we can discover something more about that characterizes the exact circumstances, conditions of what the shroud actually is, there doesn't seem much point in trying to pursue it to a finer detail.
Fair enough. Fair enough. All right. And another question. This one I'll ask to both of you guys, but so it's something that's interesting to me. So Teddy is asking about this new Oresme document. How do we know that this is actually an original autograph written by the Bishop Oresme versus a later manuscript? And because this is a question that I've asked Hugh in relation to the Darcy Memorandum, I would like to get both of your takes. How do we know that the Darcy Memorandum is also the original autograph and not a later 15th century manuscript copy, or 17th century or 16th, whatever? So yeah, for both the Darcy Memo and this Oresme document, how do we know they're autographs from the 14th century and not later manuscript copies in subsequent centuries?
Right. The copies of the Orem document are almost certainly not autographs. They're copies. There are 4 of them, and they are almost identical, although I've no doubt that the 2 scholars putting them together will make short notes of all the of exactly where they all differ. As to the 2 D'Arcis Memoranda, which I now have copies of, both copies, it's very difficult to say whether they're almost certainly not necessarily in the bishop's own hand, because they're quite long and bishops would tend to simply dictate them to a secretary who would then write them all out. They are both extremely neat and tidy, and although we've been given the impression, or perhaps that's my fault.
Oh, you froze again, Hugh. If he doesn't come back in the next few seconds, I'll turn it to you.
It happens every time. I'm back. It's very difficult to say. Yeah, I'm waiting for it now. It's actually very difficult to say which of the 2 copies that we've got is the later and which one is the earlier, because the one of them has a passage crossed out in it, which you would expect would mean that a subsequent copy would not have that crossed out passage in it. But actually the other copy has the passage in it. So I'm a bit stumped as to whether the 2 copies were made at the same time, one for Darcy's personal use and one to be sent off to be recopied by somebody else. Well, we don't know.
Okay.
We won't be a later forgery. We know that Chifflet actually mentions, I think it's Chifflet who mentions the certainly the copy, and he was writing in 16 something or other. So we ask ourselves, if it's a forgery from the 15th century, why would anybody have forged it? What for? It would have served no purpose, and it certainly didn't serve any purpose.
Oh, I'm not saying forged it. I'm saying when they copied it, maybe they made certain interpolations. This is something that textual critics know happens all the time.
Yeah, not if we've got two almost identical copies.
Fair enough. Jack, what's your take on this question? With these two documents, how do we know we have the originals, or is it reasonable to say, do we have a later 15th century or even later in subsequent centuries copy with potential interpolations?
Well, I know that there are 4 manuscripts of the Oresme writing. We do not know. That's why I started this out by saying we don't have them, nor do we even have the research that has been performed on them. I have no idea whether there were any differences noted between the manuscripts, and if there were, which manuscript reading they chose or they preferred. But besides interpolations, another problem is, of course, scribal errors, transcription errors. And so, we could end up arguing about a particular word in Latin that appears in one of these manuscripts, and we can't be certain firsthand that this is what is the word that was used in a manuscript, or if any of the manuscripts use different words. Manuscripts themselves are dated, and so I wrote recently on a document called the Latin Sermon, and there's 4 different manuscripts in 4 different libraries, all bearing different dates. And so that would be true, I think, about the Oresme transcript as well. On the D'Arcis Memorandum, I don't think we can absolutely positively know that they were autographs even by a clerk. They were found in the archives of the Troyes diocese, so that's one indication, although they could have been rewritten at one time. I have to say that it's news to me, and I'm very glad that Hugh finally has gotten some copies of these 2 different folios that are there. And what he's found, I think, could kind of reverse what the thinking has been at this time, because on folio, I think it's 137, which is supposed to be like the clean copy of it, or the fair copy of it. If that still has the questionable sentence in it, that seems like that could very well have been the first copy, the first attempt by Darcy, and that it was on the second copy, which was always thought to be the rough draft or the earlier copy, that it was then in the process that he decided that his words were indiscreet, that the sentence that was knocked out was a criticism of the Pope. And it not only has this interlineation, which Hugh talked about, it's got a word like "lacat," to take it out, omit it, something along those lines. So it sounds like that might have been the final draft of the drafts. But what's odd then is it's on the 137, which under this would be the earlier one, where it has this heading that he intends to send it to the Pope, at least the way I think that Hildeleinen reported on it back in like 1993. The heading is missing from the other copy. Or is that true, Hugh? There's no heading on the other copy?
Sorry, I was just unmuting. Yes, that's absolutely true. But of course, the fact that he's written, "I'm going to send this to the Pope," on one copy means that that wasn't the bit that he was going to send to the Pope. I mean, the Pope wouldn't have got a piece of paper, and the first thing
It doesn't
Is-
mean
I'm gonna
that.
say
It
this
could,
is a
it
vote.
could mean that. It could mean that. Yeah.
So
In any
it
event,
couldn't be-
I don't personally believe that that what Hugh has in hand now were written at a later date. There doesn't seem to be a motive for doing it, like he said, but I don't think you could preclude that possibility. I thought your question all along, Dale, was a legitimate question, something that somebody hasn't thought about, and that it requires some consideration, even if it might be ultimately determined in the negative.
Yeah, that's a great point. Look, all I was saying is on the Pro-Shroud side, myself included, I've always just assumed that let's take it as these are the original autographs, and then they're still problematic. I don't think they prove what the skeptic says, but I just wanted to raise reasonable doubts and just to raise the question. Well, how do we know these aren't a manuscript copy from 100 years later or 200 years later, where there are some interpolations? Maybe the inquiry is an interpolation or something like that. So
I think there's actually on one of these copies, I think there's a scribal note that comes from, I don't know, 16th, 17th, or 18th century that somebody who had access to them at that time is at least writing on one of the copies at that time. So that might be some indication that they were retranscribed at that time. I do think that the language, the people that I've seen who have knowledge of this, think that the language that was used conforms with late 14th century Latin. But of course, if they were just transcribing, they would be using those same words anyway. So it's difficult to say.
Yeah, exactly. Just to quote beloved Hugh Farey here, so his answer to this question is Dale Glover has popped up with the bizarre claim that the two papers or folios in question, the manuscript copies, are written in 14th century Latin, in 14th century literary style, and in 14th century handwriting. And this is how we date it. But you're sort of saying with me, those factors alone can't be used to distinguish between a 15th century or 14th century thing necessarily, or are you agreeing that those factors could be used to date it to the specific time?
That's to you, Mark.
I think it's to you, Bart.
Well, no, I'm saying that. Well, I've now got, because I thought it was worthwhile, I have the whole stack of all 75 papers which are in the Champagne 154, which is this little folio full of papers relating to Leary from the 14th century and onwards. Mm-hmm. And a lot of them are in very, very, very clearly, you could see the handwriting and how it fits in with its style. So the D'Arcis Memorandum slots into a huge pile of these things. Let's say 75 documents. And that doesn't seem to be anything uncharacteristic of it. So I think it would be upon the people who claim it was a forgery to produce some better reason for it than just that they don't like what it says.
But I don't think it's a claim by Dale or anyone else that's a forgery. This is a lot of the hyperbole that's going on. It's not what Dale said. It's not what I understood he said. I think he's just raising a legitimate question as to the authenticity of the documents. I don't think he's saying that it is a forgery or that he's trying to prove it. I think he's just trying to raise the question. And, I don't know if that was in part what prompted you to get this folio 154, but if it was, great. I mean, the whole idea of asking questions is to get more answers. And if I may just say, I think that, and I say this against the authenticity side too, we're dealing so much with hyperbole these days on both sides. I think there's this competition that's out there right now for both sides to try to get the most attention. I think that's why the Cesar Murray paper came out, which also doesn't really add anything to the mix. It's to grab a headline. It's to get all these news outlets and podcasts to be talking about something. In what I call the olden days now, the emphasis was on research, and then when you finished your research and you finished your debating, then somebody wrote something, and that's what the standard was. Now it's like grab something, say that it means something, and then just try to get a lot of publicity, either for the authenticity side or for the medievalist side. And I think that's a tragedy of what's going on in syndenology, which is supposed to be the study of the shroud, which is really the academic study of the shroud. And I just really wish that this hyperbole would just stop, and it would be okay for somebody like Dale to raise a legitimate question and have it answered. You know, not him being accused of being an authenticist where he doesn't know what he's talking about or anything like that.
Absolutely. Yeah, well, perfectly said, Jack. That was my intent. And I appreciate Hugh going to the links to get that answer and get the actual manuscripts. Just one last follow-up on this for you, Hugh, since you have, so that comparative argument I think would work to convince me. I'm just curious, have you been able, so you've compared the handwriting and the style, and it's comparable to other 14th century manuscripts. Have you compared it to 15th or 16th century?
Yes.
Is there a noticeable difference that you?
Yes, there are. Yes, quite clear differences. The style of writing is quite distinctive. I'll put some copies up. I only got these things yesterday. It takes about 2 weeks to order them, and I haven't got through them yet. I haven't even gone through what documents there are, let alone trying to start translating them, because translating medieval Latin's not great fun. But yeah, I can certainly look at the handwriting. Yeah,
that would be great. Yeah, I'd appreciate that. So, all right. So the good news is we are beyond the 2-hour mark, and we were not cut off. So at this point, I'll leave it up to you guys. Is there anything left to discuss regarding the new medieval document and or its impact on our understanding of the shroud history you guys would like to discuss with each other?
If I could ask you a question, this is not a cross-examination question. This is an informational question. I think this is what he wrote on his blog, and I was intrigued by it. Here's the quote. Somewhat bizarrely, the relevant passage, this is the Oresme or Oresme passage, has been translated before in, I think it's 1931, but its relevance to the shroud was not recognized at that time. And I'm wondering if you could tell me in what work that was translated and what was the context of that work, because you know, maybe it provides a fifth manuscript, or maybe it was taken from one of these manuscripts. But
yes,
I thought that was an interesting nugget.
I did look it up. So there was a lady called Lynn Thorndike, Thorndike, who in 1934 wrote A History of Magic and Experimental Science. So it wasn't about Nicholas Oresme, but she quoted from him in places. And in volume 3, page 468, and I have looked it up. It's on archive.org, like most of these useful books are, and she quotes it there. And it's also in, and I haven't looked this up, in an Italian book called Mirabilia Scientisimo e Filosofia della Natura nei Codlibeta di Nicole Oresme in the Annali dell'Istituto e Museo di Storia della Scienza di Firenze, which was written in 1984, and presumably wasn't the slightest bit because I wasn't interested in the shroud. People let it pass by. But if you've got the paper, Mark.
Yes, Jack is my name.
Jack, I've made that. Keep making that.
That's why I was calling you Far. I thought we were
Mark Jack. Yes, that's right. You can call me Far Hoofrey if you like. Okay. Anyway, it's down at the bottom. It's in the footnotes down here.
I can't read them. Is there?
No, you can't read them from here.
Is there a quote of the quote?
No.
I'm just wondering if it reads the same way that Sarzeau puts it in his article.
If this discussion goes on for a bit, I'll find out.
Well, anyway, I thought that was an interesting possible news source to take a look at.
All right, awesome. So yeah, do you guys feel that we've kind of covered everything on this angle, or anything else that you
Yeah,
guys?
I think we beat a two-sentence snippet to death. You
Yeah,
know,
yeah,
and we're around the perimeters, and a lot of it has to do with what it actually means, what it doesn't mean, what it hasn't said. But I do not think that this is, I think it's been described now by the media as like new and significant. The article is new, the text is newly found, but I don't think there's anything new about Shroud history or Shroud knowledge in it. And I don't think it really has any significance whatsoever. I don't think it affects the credibility of the D'Arcis Memorandum, but if you're going to have to make an argument about that, I would say that it actually raises more questions than the limited way it might support one of those allegations. And it's been beaten to death so much in this past week. I just kind of hope it'll go away, because it's like one of those meaningless things that come and go.
Awesome. Yeah, Hugh. I don't know if you're still there or not, but
Must have been something I said.
yeah. You finally got to him. But all right, well, yeah, it looks like we don't have any further audience questions, and like you said, we've kind of covered the topic. So I think this discussion was great. Thank you to both you and Hugh for coming on and giving the debate. Hugh just dropped off, but yeah, hopefully, we'll have you guys back to new guest.
Yeah, I'm still up on the screen here.
There's
Hugh.
Hey, Hugh, you dropped off.
It's the frozen Hugh.
Geez, well, you really got to him. But yeah, hopefully you and Hugh can return back and do some further debates, because it sounds like Hugh's done some research now. Because I know when you guys were debating the history before, he didn't have much to contribute. But I think now he's kind of done some research into your theory. So yeah, maybe we could bring you guys back to do a debate.
Well, that is, all kidding aside, that's what I respect about Hugh. He is a researcher, and he puts himself out to get this information, and I think we benefit by it when he shares the information. Of course, the information then has to be interpreted and assessed, and obviously from two different standpoints and vantage points. Usually, those assessments are quite different.
Jack, are you
I'm here.
Oh, okay. You just stopped talking. So, all right. Yeah, absolutely. And Hugh, I'll turn it over to you if you want to give sort of a final word before we close out.
In a sense, oh, hang on. Oh, yes, you got me. In a sense, I'd agree with Jack. It's important not to make mountains out of molehills. This is very much it's a side reference. And if you pick up somebody's, it's a footnote, and you pick up somebody's footnote and it says, I saw this in the news the other day. Then necessarily, you shouldn't say that they definitely think that this definitely proves, well, the RM definitely proved that the shroud was authentic, or whether he thought the shroud was inauthentic or was a fake or not. It doesn't mean that it was or not. We're only looking at one person's view, and we're looking at literally, well, not literally a footnote, but certainly an aside, a little illustration. It wasn't an investigation into the nature of the shroud. It wasn't even an investigation into the nature of the clerics of Leary specifically. It was just an illustration that some clerics get up to bad things.
Awesome.
I think we end on a point of complete agreement.
Well, that's good.
Sounds great. So, all right, guys. Yeah. So that's it for today. I'm just gonna play a clip as part of an outro for my friend Phil Bear, who I did a show on his new prayer app, and he just wants to show a quick little promo, and then we'll close out the show. So let me just share that for people. And perfect. So a bit of an advertisement, but here we go.
We've all said it. I'll pray for you. But life gets busy, and even the best intentions can slip away. Supplica is here to change that. It turns every promise to pray into a daily rhythm of faithfulness. Supplica is a prayer empowerment app. It is your personal companion in prayer. Always instantly within reach on your phone, tablet, or computer, it brings clarity and focus to your private devotion and ignites the power of united prayer when used in your church or ministry. Every night, Supplica sends you one simple email. It includes all of your daily items, any requests from organizations you belong to, and a rotating set of your other prayer items. That way, every need gets covered over time. Nothing is forgotten. Nothing is lost. When you pray for someone, you can let them know. Supplica sends them a brief note of encouragement, reminding them they're not alone and giving them the chance to reply in thanks. In your dashboard, you can add requests, set categories, mark them daily or rotating, choose a target date, or tag them with organizations. When God answers, mark the item as answered, and your prayer history becomes a living testimony of His faithfulness. For individuals, Supplica builds consistency, keeps your list organized, reminds you of every promise, and helps you develop a steady rhythm of intercession. Prayer becomes intentional, practical, and deeply encouraging. For organizations, Supplica multiplies impact. Churches, camps, and ministries can share requests seamlessly. Only one member needs to add a request, and everyone who belongs to that organization receives it in their nightly email. Members don't just share requests, they carry one another's burdens together every single day. The health of the body of Christ depends on the health of its prayer life. Supplica is more than an app. It's a calling. It helps believers grow in prayer, and when believers grow, the church grows stronger. Supplica runs in your browser. No app store needed. Use it on your phone, tablet, or computer and add it to your phone's home screen for instant access. Subscriptions are handled securely by Stripe, and your data stays private. Simple, safe, and affordable. Just $10 a month. Supplica has transformed prayer lives. Can transform yours. For just a few dollars each month, you gain a tool that organizes your list, encourages others, and unites God's people in daily intercession. Start your free trial today at mysupplica.com. Supplica is elegantly simple, insanely affordable, and spiritually powerful. It will turbocharge your individual prayer life. It's time to elevate prayer from a routine to a movement and give your organizations the gift of unity, encouragement, and a legacy of answered prayers.
All right, so that's from Phil Bear, the Supplica prayer app, and I'll put the link in the YouTube video description there. But other than that, that is it for today's show. Thank you guys for showing up, and have a great week, everybody.
Okay.
Thank you, Dale. Stay well, Hugh.
Bye then. Right. Yes. More blogs coming up.